Okay, brethren, for a few weeks now, we've been looking at the book of Job. This is week number 5, in case you've lost track. And we said before, the standard understanding of the book of Job is that Job was a self-righteous man, very wealthy, high status, very important in his lifetime, and it resulted in him being self-righteous. And therefore, God engineered calamities and troubles to bring Job down and to humble him. And the method that God chose to do that was to use Satan as his proxy, as a tool to bring Job down a bit or two and humble him. So really, although it was Satan who was involved directly, so to speak, God engineered the whole program because he wanted to humble Job, which, if you think about it, doesn't put God in a particularly good light, does it? He's bringing pain and suffering and anguish on his servant, whom he said was blameless. All right. Now, we've seen already that Job and his friends all agreed that it was God who was behind it all. The three friends said, it's God who's doing this to you. We're blaming God. We're accusing God. But God's right to do it because, Job, you're a wicked man, right? You're a wicked man and God is doing what is right. If you would just repent of your wickedness, God could take you out of this calamity. So as far as they're concerned, Job was wicked, God was doing it, God was right to do it. In fact, God should have done worse, right? That's what they thought. And Job agreed it was God who's doing it. Job said, God's doing this to me, but it's not fair. It's not right. God is unjust to treat me this way because I'm a good person. I'm a blameless person. Therefore, God is in the wrong. I know he's doing it. So everybody's agreed God's doing it. Now, of course, in reality, it wasn't God who was doing it. It was Satan who was doing it. And I think we said last week, Finis Dake, in his Dake Annotated Bible, does lots of lists. One of the lists he's got in his Bible is 74 false charges that he's counted that Job made against God. 74, not 5 or 10, 74, nearly 100 false charges that Job made against the Creator God. For example, that God multiplies wounds without cause. No reason to. He just does it. He wounds, causes pain and suffering just because he feels like it. Gets up in the morning one day and says, I think I'll bring some pain and suffering on people today. No cause. He accused God of destroying the blameless. Now, we probably can all say, well, I don't mind if God destroys the wicked. We should get a move on there, but destroying the blameless. Well, how could God do that? Well, Job said he did. That God won't forgive sin. God expects us to forgive sin. God forgives sin. That he hates Job. Well, of course, God doesn't hate anybody in that sense. He's prepared to love people, given half a chance. That God is cruel. That God shows no justice. That was one of Job's main complaints. God is unjust. The great creator God, governor of the universe, is not a just being. And that's about half a dozen. There's 74 false charges, right? So let's go over 2 or 3 of the scriptures we looked at last week, which is Job explaining what he thinks is going on. The week before we looked at the 3 friends, what they made of it all. But last week we looked at what Job made of it all. So let's just have a quick reminder of what we covered last week. Job chapter 9. And let's start in verse 17. So this is some of the accusations that Job made against God. For he, God, crushes me with a tempest and multiplies my wounds without cause. He's got no reason to do this. No justification. He's just wounding me for the sake of it. We'll have a look at verses 22 to 23. It is all one thing. Therefore I say, he destroys the blameless and the wicked. If the scourge slays suddenly, he laughs at the plight of the innocent. So yeah, God destroys the wicked. Fine. Most of us are okay with that. But Job says that God destroys the blameless. And if the scourge slays suddenly, if some problem comes along out of the blue, God laughs at the plight of the innocent. So some innocent child gets killed in a car crash, God laughs at it. Some innocent child gets killed in a house fire, God laughs at it. But Scripture tells us God takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked, let alone laughing at the problems that come suddenly on the innocent. So you can see Job's got a few problems here in what he thinks about God, his nature, and the way he deals with things. Have a look at chapter 10. We'll read verses 2 and then 7 to 8. Job 10, verse 2. I will say to God, do not condemn me. Show me why you contend with me. So there's no question in Job's mind, God's doing this. Show me why. Show me why you are contending with me this way. I don't understand it. Explain it to me. Why are you, God, doing this? Because it wasn't God. It was the devil. Verses 7 to 8. Although you know that I am not wicked, and there is no one who can deliver from your hands have made me and fashioned me an intricate unity, yet you would destroy me. You know I'm not wicked, yet you want to destroy me. Why? What's going through your mind, God? Explain this to me. All right? Let's have a look at Job 13. Read verse 3 and 18. Verse 3, but I would speak to the Almighty, and I desire to reason with God. We saw this, I think, last week. There are several places where it looks like in Job's mind, he has an idea of going into a court, a law court, and prosecuting God for what he's doing, which is entirely wrong in Job's eyes. He wants to get to court, be a judge up there, be a jury over here, and then Job can present his case, and God can present his case. When they do that, Job will be the one in the right, because Job knows he's blameless. And God has no reason, no cause, no justification for what he's doing. So like verse 3 says, I would speak to the Almighty. I desire to reason legally with God in front of, witnesses. Verse 18, see now, I have prepared my case, my legal case. I know I shall be vindicated. When I take God to court, I'm going to be vindicated. God's going to be in the wrong. That's the way Job's seeing it. Right? Now, I don't think many of us would perhaps feel the same way, that we could say, well, I'm blameless. There's no reason God could ever punish me or whatever. But Job knew he was a good man. And he was right, because God himself says, chapter 1 and chapter 2, blameless and upright. So he was blameless. That's why Job's three friends, despite many chapters of debating and arguing with Job, they couldn't find a problem. They couldn't specify. They knew he must be wicked. Obviously, God's doing this, and God, being just, would only punish the wicked. So you must be wicked, Job. Can't quite figure out where you're wicked, but we know you're wicked. And Elihu said, well, it's ridiculous. You guys have been fighting and arguing with Job forever, and you can't find a thing wrong with him. Well, you couldn't, because Job, in God's eyes, was blameless. There's nothing to find there. All right. So we have 29 chapters out of the 42 chapters in the book. 29 chapters are Job and his three friends debating and arguing, pushing backwards and forwards about what's taking place here. But today we want to move on and see what God makes of it when God finally turns up. All right. We know what Job thought. We know what his friends thought. But what does God think of the experience and all the words that have been uttered by these guys? But before we go and do that, let's just get a bit more background. So let's go back to Job chapter 2. We read Job 1 way at the beginning, and Job 2 just pretty much repeats a lot of that stuff. But let's read verses 1 to 3 in Job chapter 2. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan, or the Satan, Ha is Hebrew for the, is Ha Satan. In the original Hebrew, the Satan, or the adversary. And the adversary came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to the adversary, from where do you come? This is a repeat of what we saw in chapter 1. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it. That's what he said in chapter 1. That's what Satan did in those days. That's what Satan's still doing today. He's going backwards and forwards on the earth like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. He's always done that. He's doing it literally today. And he'll do it tomorrow. Satan tomorrow will be going to and fro on the earth, looking for some he can devour. And if he comes across your case, he may look at you and decide that, oh, that person looks vulnerable to me, which is why we all have to be super vigilant. Verse 3, then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? And we covered this in week 1. That's not a particularly good translation. The original Hebrew is, have you set your heart on my servant Job? It's not that God's saying, hey, Satan, have a look at this guy over there. See him? What do you think of him? Satan had already set his eyes, his heart on Job. God's just bringing up into the conversation. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you set your heart on my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil? So we know that Job wasn't filled with self-righteousness. He was an upright and blameless man. And still he holds fast to his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without cause. That's something that Satan tried to do. We won't go back to chapter 1, but in chapter 1, Satan said to God, you stretch out your hand and trouble his life. We'll see what he's like then. You do it, God. That's what Satan was trying to do, trying to incite God to get involved. And of course, God's not going to do that. The Hebrew word there for incited, which you can see there, is suth, S-U-T-H. And the word suth, the dictionaries tell us, has the connotation of evil seduction. So when God says to the devil, you incited me against Job without any cause, any reason to, it implies that you were evil in inciting me or seducing me to take action against my servant Job. Now, God's not a novice, obviously. God's not going to yield to the schemes of Satan the devil, is he? I think we can know that for a fact. If Satan's going to try and trick God into doing something that God should not do, God's not going to fall for it. He's far wiser than Satan is. So when the devil's trying to incite God, to seduce God, God's not going to fall for it. He's going to stand back from that. That particular word there we can see elsewhere. If you hold your place, let's turn to Deuteronomy 13. See the word suth in another context. Deuteronomy 13. Let's read verses 6 through 9. If your brother, the son of your mother, your son or your daughter, the wife of your bosom, or your friend who is as your own soul, secretly entices you. That word entices is suth, right? What God used speaking to the devil. You incited me, or here, secretly entices you, saying, let us go and serve other gods which you have not known, neither you nor your fathers, of the gods of the people which are all around you, near to you or far off from you, from one end of the earth to the other end of the earth. You shall not consent to him or listen to him, nor shall your eye pity him, nor shall you spare him or conceal him, but you shall surely kill him. Your hand shall be first against him to put him to death, and afterward the hand of all the people, and you shall stone him with stones until he dies. If even a close relative, verse 6, secretly entices you. So the word entice has this evil connotation, trying to lure somebody or influence somebody to do something very wrong, something sinful, right? Which could happen, in a family, in a neighborhood where one person tries to go out there and try to lure, to influence others to commit sins and so on. So here's what we're seeing in Job, turn back to Job, that Satan the devil has the effrontery to try to entice God to do evil, right? You might remember in the Gospels where Jesus was tempted by the devil just after his baptism, and the devil incited Jesus or tried to sort of seduce Jesus to jump off the pinnacle of the temple. So, the angels will bring you down and people can look at you sort of floating down from high up. and that will give you, status and importance, and people will marvel at it. So the devil was trying to entice, Jesus. That's what the devil does. But, Jesus didn't fall for it in the Gospels. God didn't fall for it here in the book of Job. Right? No way is God going to yield to somebody like the devil with his clever schemes. So let's carry on, picking up in verse 4 of chapter 2. So Satan answered the Lord and said, "Skin for skin, yes, all that a man has he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand now." He's still trying to get God to do it. "Stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh. He will surely curse you to your face." Because that's what Satan would do. Figured out Job would do the same. Of course, Job never did do. And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, he is in your hand, but spare his life." Again, that's not, okay, here he is, go after him. Behold just means look, see, observe, he's in your hand. And of course, we're all vulnerable to Satan today, just as Job was in those days. It's just stating a fact. It's not saying, here he is. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with painful boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And Job took for himself a potsherd with which to scrape himself while he sat in the midst of the ashes. So he's lost his family, 10 children. He's lost his cattle, his livestock, his wealth, his prosperity. Now he's covered in boils from head to toe, scraping himself with a pus, I guess, and whatever oozes out of these boils. And he's in a bad way, right? Then his wife said to him, "Do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die." Thank you for your encouragement, Mrs. Job. But he said to her, "You speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity?" In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Well, he didn't sin with his lips, but he was guilty of ignorance. That's brought out in a million places in the book of Job. It's a bit like in the first chapter, God, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. It wasn't the Lord who took away. And here, it looks like Job is very passive. Well, we have to take good things when God gives them. We have to accept adversity when God brings it, because he's still seeing this as God, right? Now, we can see, looking at those few verses there, Satan is definitely persistent, having failed first time round with Job. Now he's pushing God again. Well, bring illness on him, bring a disease on him, then you'll see him curse you, right? So Satan is persistent, right? He's never going to go away, and Satan will still be around tomorrow. Might be in your life, might see you somewhere as he travels around the world tomorrow, and might think you look vulnerable, or me. Which is why we have to be, paying attention. Now, I suspect at this stage, reading between the lines, that Job's defences were a bit low, because I don't know how much earlier the events of chapter 1 took place, but Job lost his 10 children, lost his livestock, his cattle, his camels, and so on. His prosperity disappeared overnight, and so on, and in a bad way. And he said, "Oh, the Lord's done this," because it wasn't the Lord that did that. So I think he was sort of passive, perhaps a bit run down. And so here, maybe a few months later, Satan comes back, sort of tries once again to sort of deceive God and entice God to get involved. God says no, but look, there he is. And it looks like that Job, was rather passive, right? He just accepted things. Now, we have to be careful when the devil's out and about, not to give opportunity. You or me shouldn't give opportunities to the devil to take us down and take us out. I'm not going to turn there, but in Ephesians 4:27, you can look at it later. Paul says to the believers in Ephesus, "Give no place to the devil." You give no place to the devil. It's your choice. You give no place to the devil. And some translations use the word opportunity. Do not give an opportunity to the devil, which, if you're careless, you and I can do. I think other translations say foothold. Give no foothold to the devil. Once he gets his foot in the door, it's going to be much more difficult to get him out. And of course, for Job, he's already given a foothold to Satan by accepting the initial problems and troubles without any resistance. So don't give an opportunity, give no place to the devil. And I mean, you can give a place to the devil. You can. You can be careless. You can be negligent. You can be lazy. You can give place to the devil. You can go and play in the devil's backyard. Not surprised if his dog comes and bites you in the bum, right? But you and I can equally not give the devil a place or a foothold or an opportunity. Unfortunately, in the case of Job, he didn't seem to realize any of that. A possible hint we can find in Job chapter 3 and verse 25. Job says here, "For the thing I greatly feared has come upon me, and what I dreaded has happened to me." Now, what's that all about? He's obviously talking about a past time in his life. What I greatly feared, not what I was nervous about, what I greatly feared has come upon me. What I dreaded has happened to me. So it looks like he was living in significant fear, right? Fear opens the door to the devil. You and I are supposed to live by faith, believing and trusting God for good things, not whatever he's on about here. The thing I greatly feared, poverty, bankruptcy, the loss of his children. Remember in chapter 1 we saw that Job used to offer burnt offerings for the sake of his children in case they'd sinned and cursed God in their feast days together. Well, that's not the way to deal with it, right? What I dreaded, sickness, disease, poverty, bankruptcy. Is that what his mind was on in former months, former years? Well, it looks like it. The thing I greatly feared has come upon me. What I dreaded has happened to me, and living in fear and anxiety and worry is not the way to live. So he gave the devil opportunities, and the devil, of course, comes along looking whom he may devour. Job looks like a candidate, hence the story. So what does God say about the whole experience of Job? God turns up in chapter 38, so let's turn there and see what God makes of it all. We had 20 chapters of Job and his philosophy and views and theology, 9 chapters of his friends. And of course you can't build any doctrine on those 29 chapters because God said they didn't know what they're talking about, any of them. But you can build doctrine on these chapters because this is God talking, and God talks what's truth. So chapter 38, verses 1 to 3. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. The earlier couple of chapters talked about a storm that appears to be approaching. So you've got dark clouds and wind blowing, and apparently God was in that storm as it approached. So verse 1, then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, "Who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me." So God says, your words have no knowledge, implying you don't know what you're talking about, Job. Verse 3, now prepare yourself like a man. I'll question you, and you shall answer me. It's like almost a sort of legal court setting. Get your act together, Job. Stand up. I'm going to interrogate you. I'm going to make a public inquiry of you. Get ready to answer my questions, Job. You want to speak to me? You want to reason with me? Here's your chance, right? But verse 2, who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Job was very sincere and, of course, blameless, but he did lack. He had a serious lack of knowledge. The Good News Bible, verse 2 says, who are you to question my wisdom with your ignorant, empty words? Ignorant, empty words. Or the New Century Version, who is this that makes my purpose unclear by saying things that are untrue? Now, Job, that's who it was. Let's read verses 4 to 21. So God's going to ask questions of Job, and basically it's going to put Job in a corner where Job is going to have to do what you and I will be doing in the same questions. I haven't got a clue. Not an idea. Don't know. At the end of which, of course, Job's going to feel, this high, like you and I would do. Because if these questions were asked of you and me, we'd struggle, I think. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you've understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Been talking so much, you windbag. Or who stretched the measuring line upon it? To what were its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Were you there when I created the earth? When the angels sang and the sons of God and so on? Were you there? Do you know the measurements of the earth? Or who shut in the sea with doors when it burst forth and issued from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band? When I fixed my limit for it and set bars and doors, when I said, this far you may come, but no farther, and here your proud waves must stop. God set up the earth, the clouds, the heavens, to work according to his purpose and plan. Were you there, Job? Did you do any of that, Job? Did you set any of this up, Job? Were you there, Job? Have you commanded the morning since your days began, and caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, and the wicked be shaken out of it? It takes on form like clay under a seal, and stands out like a garment. From the wicked their light is withheld, and the upraised arm is broken. Have you entered the springs of the sea, or have you walked in search of the depths? Well, there are some books out there, you'll find them if you look around, about the scientific references in the book of Job. And that's one of them. Have you entered the springs of the sea? It's only fairly recently that people have discovered there are springs in the sea. If you go into the seas, the oceans, the Atlantic, Pacific, whatever, there are springs of fresh water that come up out of fissures in the seabed. Some of them are hot, very hot, thermal vents, I think they call them. Others are colder. But there are springs of fresh water in the salt sea. And that's what it says there. Have you entered the springs of the sea? Well, who knew that up until the last, 50 years, 100 years? Have you walked in search of the depths? Well, of course he hadn't. Have you done it? I haven't done it. Have the gates of death been revealed to you? Have you seen the doors of the shadow of death? Have you comprehended the breadth of the earth? Tell me, if you know all this. Where is the way to the dwelling of light? And darkness, where is its place? That you may take it to its territory, that you may know the paths to its home. Do you know it because you were born then, or because the number of your days is great? Are you an ancient? Do you know all these things? Do you understand the earth, the seas, the oceans? Right? Do you? Of course, the answer is, don't know, don't know. Don't know, don't know that either, don't know this, no, I don't know that. Sorry, can't help you there. Which, for Job, it's like, seems to be a lot of things I don't know. Verses 31 to 33. Can you bind the cluster of the Pleiades, or loose the belt of Orion? Can you bring out Mazzaroth in its season? Or can you guide the great bear with its cubs? Do you know the ordinances of the heavens? Can you set their dominion over the earth? So now God points to this sky, nighttime sky. Can you bind the cluster of the Pleiades? That's seven sisters, some people call it that. Little constellation in the sky. Can you loose the belt of Orion? Can you bring out Mazzaroth in its season? I mean, constellations generally, although I think a lot of scholars say it probably means the zodiac, the constellations in the sky that the sun appears to move throughout the course of a year. Can you do any of that? Can you guide the great bear, Big Dipper, we generally call it, with its cubs? Can you control the heavens, Job? Can you control the stars and constellations, Job? Can you do any of that, Job? In fact, is there anything you can do, Job? Right? Chapter 39, verses 1 to 2. Do you know the time when the wild mountain goats bear young? Or can you mark when the deer gives birth? Can you number the months that they fulfill, how long the gestation is? Or do you know the time when they bear young? I think the implication is, okay, Job, you probably know about sheep and goats and cattle and domestic animals. And what about the wild animals that live out in the mountains or the jungles or the deserts and so on? Do you know how long it takes for their young to be born? Do you know what time of year they give birth at? Do you know anything, Job, about the actual world out there, outside of your farmland and agriculture? Of course, Job knows nothing at all. Drop down to verses 9 to 12. Will the wild ox be willing to serve you? Will he bed by your manger? If you've got a King James version, it says unicorn, I think, there, which, of course, is highly unlikely that it's a unicorn. Wild ox may not be a particularly accurate translation. It's apparently some very big, super powerful, fairly wild beast of some sort. Some scholars think it's what they call an auroch, A-U-R-O-C-H, which is a massive, big beast, about twice the size of our bulls today. Great big, huge thing with massive horns, super powerful, quite dangerous, right? But wild ox, I suppose, is a part of the way there. Will the wild ox, or auroch, be willing to serve you? Will he bed by your manger? Can you bind the wild ox in the furrow with ropes? Will he plough the valleys behind you? Will you trust him because his strength is great? Or will you leave your labour to him? Will you trust him to bring home your grain and gather it to your threshing floor? So here's a very powerful beast. Is Job strong enough to tame and control a wild ox, an auroch, if that's what it's referring to? The answer is no. I think they've been trying to breed aurochs, working backwards. I think they went extinct a few hundred years ago. But some people are trying to, I think they call it backward breeding. So you look for the sort of genes and characteristics of an auroch, and you try and breed modern day cattle and try and go backwards in time to restore. But if they do that, it's going to be a pretty big beast. And by the sound of it, it's not going to be easy to tame it. And Job couldn't do that. Even a big bull, Job's going to struggle with, right? Let alone what comes later. Let's read verses 26 to 29. Does the hawk fly by your wisdom and spread its wings toward the south? Does the eagle mount up at your command and make its nest on high? Do you give the birds the ability to fly? Job? Just asking. On the rock it dwells and resides, on the crag of the rock and the stronghold. From there it spies out the prey. Its eyes observe from afar. Well, we know that, kestrels and eagles, birds of prey, they can see a mouse at about a mile away or something. And owls and so on can see a mouse half a mile away in pitch black. And of course they can fly, and some condors and so on can fly tens of thousands of feet up. I've seen geese flying over the Mount Everest, right? But did you do that, Job? Did you create the ability to fly in birds and eyesight? They can see a mouse a mile away. Did you do that, Job? Did you do anything, Job, thinking about it? And of course, Job's thinking, oh my word, I don't know. I don't know that either. No, sorry, I can't help you there. I'm sorry, not my area of expertise, right? He's running out. And all God's doing is asking him questions. He's not condemning him, right? He's not being angry with him. He's just asking him questions. Chapter 40, verses 1 and 2. Moreover, the Lord answered Job and said, shall the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? He who rebukes God, let him answer it. And obviously Job had contended and argued with God before he saw him, and rebuked God, accused God falsely 74 times at least. The Voice translation says, have you heard enough? Will the one who finds fault with the highest one now make his case? Let God's accuser answer him. Almost like God's referring back to this desire Job had for a legal court hearing. He who rebukes God, prosecutes God, charges God, let him answer it. Turn up in court, Job. Let's hear your answers. Or the Message translation, are you going to haul me, the mighty one, into court and press charges? Job, right? Verses 3 to 5. Then Job answered the Lord and said, behold, I am vile. I think not a great translation. The Hebrew word means trifling, of little account, or insignificant. Behold, I am trifling. I am insignificant. I'm a nobody. I'm nothing. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand over my mouth. Once I have spoken, but I will not answer. Yes, twice, but I will proceed no further. He's going to abandon his case, right? Because there's nothing to say. Got no defense. Don't know enough to come before God and interrogate God about anything. Verses 6 to 14. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you. You shall answer me, the legal court setting again. Stand up. Get ready to answer my questions. I'm going to interrogate you. Right? You've taken an oath. Answer me the following. Would you indeed annul my judgment? Would you condemn me that you may be justified? It's quite an important question. Would you indeed annul my judgment? Would you condemn me that you may be justified? The Holman Christian Standard Bible translates that verse as, would you really challenge my justice? Would you declare me guilty to justify yourself? Is that what you think, Job? Verse 9, have you an arm like God? Can you thunder with a voice like his? Then, okay, adorn yourself with majesty and splendor. Array yourself with glory and beauty. Let's see you in your best gear, your best bib and tucker. Disperse the rage of your wrath. Look on everyone who is proud and humble him. Look on everyone who is proud and bring him low. Tread down the wicked in their place. Hide them in the dust together. Bind their faces in hidden darkness. If you can do those things, bring down the proud and the mighty and so on, then I will also confess to you that your own right hand can save you. If you can do all these great things, if you can bring down the high and the mighty and the lofty and so on and humble them all, if you can dispense your rage around the earth, demonstrating how super powerful you are, then I will confess to you that your own right hand can save you, because Job can't do any of that, can he? He hasn't got the ability. Verses 15 to 24. So now God uses other illustrations just to demonstrate to Job how insignificant he actually is. He said, I'm insignificant, I'm vile, I'm of little account, I'm trifling. God said, you are actually. Let me just demonstrate a bit more to you. So verses 15 to 24, and he uses the example of Behemoth, which no one's too sure what Behemoth was. Probably extinct now, unless it's hidden somewhere in an African jungle, in a valley somewhere. Look now at Behemoth, which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. See now, his strength is in his hips, and his power is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. So it's some huge, monstrous creature. Best guess is what we might call today a dinosaur, right? Because dinosaurs were created by God. They didn't come 65 million years ago, whatever. They were created at the same time as the rest of the earth and so on. So it says here, he moves his tail like a cedar. And yet, strangely enough, lots of commentaries say that the behemoth was probably a hippopotamus. I've seen a hippopotamus tail. It's not quite a piece of string hanging down from his bottom, but it's certainly not like a cedar. You know, a cedar is a huge tree, a glorious tree, and the boughs of a cedar stretch out 30, 40 feet. So this is a creature who's got a tail like a cedar. I mean, that could be something like a diplodocus, huge big beast with a long tail that can be held horizontal as it runs along. And of course, these huge beasts like these dinosaurs, sauropods, diplodocus, and so on, they've got massive hips, massive abdomens because of the sheer weight of them. His bones, carrying on, are like beams of bronze, his ribs like iron bars. I mean, super powerful, super strong. He's the first of the ways of God, or the foremost of God's creation almost. Only he who made him can bring near his sword. Surely the mountains yield food for him, and all the beasts of the field play there. He lies under the lotus trees in a covert of reeds and marsh. The lotus trees cover him with their shade, the willows by the brooks around him. Indeed, the river may rage, might be in spate, yet he is not disturbed. He is confident though the Jordan gushes into his mouth, though he takes it in his eyes, or one pierces his nose with a snare. So we've got a gigantic beast here, possibly a dinosaur, which was living at the same time as Job. So Job, it says, verse 15, I made along with you. So Job had seen Behemoth, and there was a powerful creature. Nobody can come near Behemoth. Rib cage like bars of iron. Other bones are like beams of bronze. Tail like a cedar bough. Possibly in length as well. Maybe it's 30 feet long, the tail. Right? And what does Job make of that? Well, by comparison, Job is insignificant. That's what Job makes of it. God can control Behemoth. Job can't control Behemoth. Right? Just another reminder. Chapter 41. Let's read verses 1 to 11. Can you draw out Leviathan with a hook, or snare his tongue with a line which you lower? So Leviathan, another monstrous creature that lives in the sea, this particular one. Right? Can you put a reed through his nose, or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many supplications to you? Will he speak softly to you? Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him as a servant forever? Will you play with him as with a bird, canary or a budgie? Or will you leash him for you maidens? Will your companions make a banquet of him? Will they portion him among the merchants? Can you fill his skin with harpoons, or his head with fishing spears? Lay your hand on him. Remember the battle. Never do it again. Indeed, any hope of overcoming him is false. No chance. This sea beast is impossible to restrain, whether it's with harpoons or javelins or whatever it might be. You're not going to do it. Try it once, you will never try again. Shall one not be overwhelmed at the sight of him? No one is so fierce that he would dare stir him up. Who then is able to stand against me? If you can't take on Leviathan, which is a creation of mine, you can take on me. I made Leviathan. I made Behemoth. You can't take them on. You can't control them. You can't tame them. You really want to take me on? And I made them. Who has preceded me that I should pay him? Everything under heaven is mine. I'm the master of Behemoth. I'm the master of Leviathan. The Old Testament Greek version uses the word drakon, D-R-A-K-O-N, for Leviathan, which of course sounds like dragon. That's where the word dragon comes from. So we're looking here about some sea creature that is dangerous. You dare not tackle him. You can't overcome him. Don't even try. So it's some sort of, I guess, sea dinosaur, maybe a plesiosaur or something like that. Could be extinct today or some ocean depth somewhere. I doubt if it's a Loch Ness Monster. No one's really seen that properly. You get all these weird photographs of blurs and things out there. Oh, Loch Ness Monster. Let's carry on. Verses 18 to 21. His sneezings flash forth light. His eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning lights. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke goes out of his nostrils as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame goes out of his mouth. So, fire-breathing dragon. Now, I've never seen one. I'd be fascinated to see a Leviathan, I think, as long as it wasn't too close to it. But it sounds like, the language might be poetic or it might be literal. I don't know. God designed him and created him, and I think by the looks of it, Job was familiar with Leviathan, otherwise it would be a meaningless comment to make. But it looks like he's fire-breathing, sea-going monster referred to as a dragon in the Greek version of the Old Testament. Oh my word, pretty horrific, right? Verses 31 to 33, he makes the deep boil like a pot, bubbles and froths and so on. He makes the sea like a pot of ointment. He leaves a shining wake behind him. One would think the deep had white hair. On earth there is nothing like him, which is made without fear. So when he moves through the water, it just froths and turns white and bubbles, the speed at which he travels. There's nothing else on the earth like Leviathan, right? And, Job has to concede well, I'm powerless. I'm insignificant. I can't tackle Leviathan. I certainly can't tackle the creator of Leviathan. Put it that way. So Job 42. Let's read verse 1 to 6. So I think God's done asking questions because obviously Job has no answers to anything. Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do everything and that no purpose of yours can be withheld from you. You asked, who is this who hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand. Things too wonderful for me which I did not know. Listen, please, and let me speak. You said, I will question you and you shall answer me. Okay, I've heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I abhor and repent in dust and ashes. Right? Now, my New King James says, I abhor myself, but myself's in italics, because with the idea people have that Job was self-righteous to start with, and God has now engineered all these calamities to bring him down a peg or two, and so on, and humble him, and so they make out of it that I abhor myself. Now I can see how self-righteous and proud of being, I now humble myself before you. That's not what Job's talking about. He's talking about abhorring his stupid statements, all his false accusations against God, the fact he doesn't know anything. I abhor and repent in dust and ashes. The Holman Christian Standard Bible says, I take back my words and repent in dust and ashes. I take back my words. I don't know why I said all that stuff. I'm ignorant. Or the New American Standard Bible, therefore I retract and I repent in dust and ashes. So he's embarrassed by what he said. Right from the get-go, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. That was complete nonsense. It wasn't the Lord that took away, and he didn't know what he's talking about. All right? Now, it's obvious that God was fairly kind towards Job here. He didn't get rough with Job. He didn't threaten Job. He didn't condemn Job. He just said, I want to ask you some questions, Job. You ready? Stand up. Answer these questions. And of course, Job realizes as we go that, you know what? I don't think I know anything. I thought I knew a lot, but I know nothing at all. And God's so much superior to me. But obviously, God did put him in his place, right? And Job finally realized just how little he understood of the earth, the oceans, the heavens, God, God's creations, God's purpose and plan, and so on, which is fine. Job came to his senses and repented of his nonsense, his false accusations, and is happy to carry on with God. And then we go verses 7 through 9, which you can read those as well. So it was after the Lord had spoken these words to Job that the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, my wrath is aroused against you and your two friends. So God didn't say that to Job. He just asked Job questions, and Job couldn't answer. And then Job said, you know what? I just realized what a foolish man I've been, and I'm an ignoramus. I apologize, take back my words. But to the three friends, God was actually wrathful. My wrath is aroused against you and your two friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has or now has. Obviously, Job said a lot of things that were foolish, but now at this point, Job has realized, he's taken back his words, he understands what God is now. Verse 8, now therefore, take for yourselves 7 bulls and 7 rams, go to my servant Job, and offer up for yourselves a burnt offering, and my servant Job shall pray for you, for I will accept him, lest I deal with you according to your folly. Or the God's Word translation says, as godless fools, because you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. So, for 9 chapters, they said that it was God doing it, and Job deserved it. So I think God gave a little bit of leeway to Job because he was physically suffering, but these 3 guys weren't suffering at all. They accused Job of being a wicked man. Wicked, 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 wicked. God said he's blameless. Upright. Wicked, wicked, wicked. So God's quite angry with these guys and says, you know what? If you want to survive, you godless fools, you better go to Job, burnt offering, and ask Job to intercede on your behalf. I'll accept Job if he prays for you. Right? So it's quite quite good in a sense. They've got to humble themselves now before Job, whom they accuse of being a wicked man, the most wicked man on the earth. And now Job's got to pray for them, which of course requires Job to forgive them. And he might thinking about that a little bit, because these guys call me wicked, the most wicked man on the earth. All my troubles, I should get twice as much. Who are these so-called friends of mine? Right? But no, Job realizes that he has to forgive them. He has to represent them to God and intercede on their behalf. So you end up, I guess, with Job and the three friends being reconciled. Job has to forgive them if he wants to get on with God and so on. Verse 9, so Eliphaz the Temanite and Bildad the Shuhite and Zophar the Naamathite went and did as the Lord commanded them, for the Lord had accepted Job. Which is good. So things are getting sorted out. We'll leave the next few verses for a moment or two. But one of the questions that often comes up is, well, how long did all this suffering last with Job? How long were his trials? How long were his calamities? People get the idea, well, years and years and years, and, much of his life was spent in pain and agony and all the rest of it. Well, Scripture doesn't say clearly, right? But there's a couple of hints. So let's look at Job chapter 7. Job chapter 7. Let's read verses 1 to 3. Is there not a time of hard service for man on earth? Are not his days also like the days of a hired man, like a servant who earnestly desires the shade, like a hired man who eagerly looks for his wages? So I have been allotted or assigned months of futility, and wearisome nights have been appointed to me. So he says, I've been allotted or assigned months of futility. So not exactly clear, but it looks like he's saying, for some months now, I've been experiencing, worrying time. Months. He doesn't say for many years I've been suffering now. He says I've been allotted months of futility. Have a look at Job 29. So Job chapter 29. Let's read verses 1 to 4. Job further continued his discourse and said, "Oh, that I were as in months past, as in the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone upon my head, when by his light I walked through darkness, just as I was in the days of my prime, when the friendly counsel of God was over my tent." He's looking back to earlier days when life was better and he was blessed and the light of God shone over his life and gave him favour. But he says it's months ago. Verse 2, "Oh, that I were as in months past," months ago. So at this stage, chapter 29, God turns up in chapter 38. At this stage, Job's talking about what happened just a few months before, when life was good and blessed and abundant, months before. So although it's not definite, certainly there's no indication it was years. It looks like months. And how many months? Well, nobody can tell. 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, but months, right? Not years. So let's get back to the last chapter, 42, just finish off the story. Read verses 10 to 17. "And the Lord restored Job's losses when he prayed for his friends," not before, but when Job accepted his friends and prayed to God on behalf of his friends, and I assume implicit in there, forgave his friends for all their rudeness and cruelty to him, that's when God restored Job. The Lord restored Job's losses. I think the Hebrew is turned Job's captivity. And that could fit in well with the fact that it was Satan who had taken Job captive. And so at this stage of the game, God's turned up. Now he releases Job from his captivity to Satan. The Lord restored Job's losses, or turned his captivity, when he prayed for his friends. Indeed, the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. This is what God does. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away? No. The Lord gives and multiplies and adds. That was the mathematics of divine mathematics. God adds, God multiplies. Satan takes away, Satan divides. God's turned up here. Now Job is doubly blessed. Right? Then all his brothers, all his sisters, and all those who had been his acquaintances before came to him and ate food with him in his house, and they consoled him and comforted him for all the adversity that the Lord had brought upon him, as they saw it in their eyes. Each one gave him a piece of silver and each a ring of gold. Now the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning. Of course, he was the wealthiest man in the East at the beginning, but Job now had his prosperity doubled. For he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, 1,000 female donkeys. He also had seven sons, and 3 daughters. So his entire family had been restored. And he called the name of the first daughter Jemimah, name of the second Keziah, name of the third Keren Hapuk. In all the land were found no women so beautiful as the daughters of Job, and their father gave them an inheritance among their brothers. Everything's back. His family's back. Sons and daughters are back. Grandchildren, great-grandchildren, all the rest of it. Flocks, camels, cattle, sheep, galore. Super prosperous now that God's turned up and turned his captivity. Verse 16, after this, Job lived 140 years and saw his children and grandchildren for 4 generations. So Job died, old and full of days. So Job lives another 140 years, and some people think, well, God gave him double what he had before. So that might mean 140 is double what he was to start with. Maybe he was 70 years old when these calamities happened, and God gave him double that, 140, meaning that he lived to be a total of 210 years. And if his calamities lasted, say, 6 months, 6 months out of 210 years is not an awful lot. It's sort of like 0.5% or 0.25% of your life. So he had a pretty good life and a pretty good ending. Now it says there his brothers and sisters and other relatives, acquaintances came to visit him at this stage. I've always wondered quite where were they before that, because he was in suffering for a long time, many months at least. So where were his brothers and sisters and acquaintances, fair weather friends, right? Did they think Job was wicked? And best is avoid him just in case they get caught by it. And here and there over the years I've heard church members say things like, well, I think I'm another Job because they've got troubles, lost jobs, lost work, perhaps, or got ill health, chronic ill health. And they say, I'm going through a terrible Job experience. You think, well, if you are, cheer up, because it won't last very long, and at the end of it, you'll have double your prosperity, One of the main takeaways, I guess perhaps the main takeaway of the book of Job is it was never God who was behind it all. At all times, the problem was Satan. The fact that the Lord gives and the Lord takes away is Job's initial nonsensical statement. He was an ignorant man. He was sincere. He didn't sin in that sense, but he was ignorant. He did not know what he was talking about, as he latterly confirmed. I don't know what I'm talking about. An ignoramus, right? So the book of Job is not God engineering calamities on one of his servants to humble him. It is the devil taking advantage of a servant of God, right, who doesn't understand what's happening and yields to it, and whose life is very troubled until God thankfully steps in and sorts things out. And of course the devil hasn't changed. Literally, he's still the same today as he was then. He's still going about today as he did then. You're still as vulnerable today as if you'd lived back in Job's day. Have a look finally at 1 Peter chapter 5 for a final scripture. 1 Peter and chapter 5. Verses 6 through 9. Therefore humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you. Verse 8. Be sober, be vigilant, meaning watchful, observant, be on guard. Why? Because your adversary, well, the name Satan means adversary, Satan, the adversary, Job chapter 1 and 2. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. He said to God, I'm going to and fro about the earth. He's doing the same thing today. That's what he was doing in Peter's day. The adversary is going around in Peter's day, and here in 2025, the adversary is still alive, right? And he's still going about to and fro, seeking whom he may devour, destroy, bring pain and anguish into their lives. Resist him, which Job didn't do, but then Job may not have had much knowledge. You know, I've got the entire Bible to look at and learn from. Job, I suspect, had very little in his day, but I don't know for a fact. Resist him, steadfast in the faith, knowing that the same sufferings are experienced by your brotherhood, your brethren in the world. So you and I are commanded there to be sober, be vigilant, and resist the devil, because he goes about as a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. He's going to seek, if he can find you and you're vulnerable, not paying attention, he may come after you. He may be after bigger fish. He may be after Mr. Trump, Mr. Macron, and Mr. Putin, all right, and Mr. Merz, and Mr. Hamas leader. But if he comes across you and you're negligent, careless, sleepy, he may decide you can be devoured. And then, of course, we don't want to end up in a Job situation where the devil's taking us to the cleaners. Resist. Give no place, give no opportunity to the devil. Put on the armour of God that you can withstand, right, the arrows of the wicked one. That's what you and I have to do. And above all, if you do get troubles in your life, don't ever blame God. That's the wrong place to look. Okay, with that, we'll conclude today's Bible study.